Welcome to our next unit, The Spirit of Independence, the causes of the Revolutionary War. This lesson is no taxation without representation. This begins on page 112 in the textbook, and there are two topics associated with this lesson. Topic 1 is dealing with Great Britain. Topic 2 is new taxes on the colonies. There are several related vocabulary terms for this lesson. Revenue and incoming money from taxes or other sources. Writ of assistance. This is a court document allowing customs officers who see the incoming and outgoing of goods and people, to enter any location to search for smuggled goods. Resolution. That's an official expression of an opinion by a group, normally a formal group. Think like Congress, think like a town council. That would be a resolution. An effigy, a mocking figure representing an unpopular individual. To mock is to make fun of. So it's kind of a funny looking figure that represents someone who is unpopular. Boycott is to refuse to buy items in order to show disapproval or force acceptance of one's terms. You basically stop buying something or stop accepting a service from someone until they change their position on an issue. And repeal, to cancel an act or law, basically to reverse a law. So there's our vocab terms. I may cover a few of them again as we get to the end of the unit. I believe most of them are most of them are actually in the second part. So when we get there, we may actually go over them again. Before reading scan, what's it look like here? These are not long sections. They're rather short. Dealing with Great Britain has two subtopics: enforcing trade laws and the Sugar Act. So that's how they're going to deal with Great Britain. How are trade laws being enforced? And what is a Sugar Act? We have to ask that question as we move on. New taxes on the colonies includes opposition to the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts. And we're seeing this word act come up quite a bit. And these are basically laws and policies applied to the colonies. On page 114, we will stop and look at a growing debt. That particular caption is really interesting, and it has something to do with objectivity in this matter. We'll get to that. Once again, if you've been following along with this, we do use a certain during reading strategy as we read, making connections, relating information we already know about the subject we're reading, comparing our experiences of what we're reading, interacting with the text, looking at the main idea and supporting details, looking how the text is organized, and additionally, considering the historical inferences, compare, contrast, one thing to another, similarities, differences, cause and effect. This leads to that. Continuity and change. What stays the same? What changes over time? Historical relevance, how it relates to the modern world. Historical context, how it relates to what's going on in the world. And periodization. Periodization is kind of a big one here, because historical context as well, but periodization even more, because we're moving out of the colonial period and into the period of revolution in America. So it's something to keep in mind. Clarify our understanding using photographs, charts, and other graphics to help understand what we're reading. Determine whether it's fact or opinion. After reading strategies, we'll recall by summarizing the text aloud or by writing. In this case, we're doing it by writing. We've been doing that all along. We'll respond using questions in the actual textbook. We will use the guiding questions and the progress check questions that are at the beginning and end of each section to draw logical conclusions and form opinions. And again, the last thing we'll do here, moving ahead of myself, is evaluate. We'll evaluate the document. We'll see if there's any bias involved in it. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I'm kind of excited. This is a great section. It gets into the actual reasons for the Revolutionary War. So excuse me if I'm excited about moving on. So let's look at this, dealing with Great Britain. First of all, why did the British government establish new policies? I think we know that from our last unit. We know that the French and Indian War were fought. And you'll notice I can answer some of these questions already, which is good. You should be able to as well. If you have that frame of reference, that background knowledge, you should be able to. So I know that they established new policies because of the French and Indian War. I know at the end of the French and Indian War, there was the Proclamation of 1763, which seems to be where this section is picking up from that. So we know about that. We also know they wanted to raise taxes. Okay, so let's see if it picks up there. Why did Parliament pass the Sugar Act? What was it attempting to do with the Sugar Act? So we're going to take a look at that. Okay, so let's get into the essential question. Why does conflict develop? Now, we know why conflict developed in the French and Indian War. The conflict developed in the French and Indian War over territory and resources and really mercantilism. Both France and Britain wanted to control that Ohio River Valley, and that led to conflict. In fact, that was, in historical context, that was one theater or one stage in a larger global war that Britain was fighting with France, which is why they were in such debt at the end of the war. And it's what causes them to raise taxes. What's the conflict here about? I bet it's a little different. So we're going to take a look at that. So let's get into the reading. After their victory in the French and Indian War, the British controlled much of North America. Now they had to protect all this territory. To meet the challenge, King George III issued the Proclamation of 1763. This order prohibited or barred colonists from living west of the Appalachian Mountains, on Native American land. For the British, the proclamation offered several advantages. It helped keep peace between the Native Americans and settlers. It also kept colonists near the Atlantic coast, where the British authority was stronger. Finally, it allowed Britain to control westward expansion and the fur trade in the region. The king sent 10,000 troops to the colonies to enforce the Proclamation of 1763 and keep the peace with the Native Americans. So, prohibited means to prevent or forbid. So, prohibited or barring someone from living out there means keeping them from moving out there. They're forbidden to be there. Okay, and what I know about the Proclamation of 1763, just take it to another step. If you lived there already, you had to come back. So if you had settled beyond the Appalachian Mountains and the Proclamation of 1763 came down, you had to leave your home and go back east. Think how awful that is for people who had called those places home. Consider that. So what I know, this paragraph is very much like the last paragraph in our last lesson. It's just picking up. It's kind of overlapping where we left off in the last lesson. Question answer. The British government established these new policies, like the Proclamation of 1763, because they were trying to keep peace with the Native Americans and control the colonists. Now, keeping peace with the Native Americans also means controlling that fur trade. Notice how that plays a big role here. Remember mercantilism. They want the resources from that region. It's very important to them, and this is why they're enacting this policy. Page 113, you see the Proclamation of 1763 map. It's right there at the bottom. Shows that the British were preventing the colonists from settling in huge tracts of land west. They did not want them on that land. It disrupted the fur trade. It upset the Native Americans, which would have forced the British to send troops to defend people, which they did not want to do. That's expensive. Okay, and it kept control of the colonists. Now, the thing about 10,000 troops, that's a problem. So we'll see how that's going to become a problem further in the reading. Enforcing trade laws, bottom of page 112. Great Britain needed new revenue, or income, there's our vocab term, to pay for the troops. The British also had large debts from the French and Indian War. We saw that in the last unit. The King and Parliament felt that the colonies should pay part of these costs, so the British government issued new taxes on the colonies. It also enforced old taxes more strictly. To avoid taxes, some colonists resorted to smuggling. This caused British revenues to fall. Okay, we were at the top of page 113 already. I got some smugglers in my picture there. What I know, William Pitt planned this during the French and Indian War, after he decided to send more troops and invest more money into the war effort. Hey, cause and effect. We knew this was coming down the line. We knew this from the French and Indian War. So here's how what we learned before relates to what we're learning now. It's a direct relationship. So the need for revenue led the British to develop new taxes and enforce trade rules, which also led to more smuggling by the colonists who hated trade laws. And this goes back to mercantilism and the Navigation Acts. We got to go back 2 units here. And if you remember, the colonists hate the Navigation Acts, but now the British are going to start to enforce them with more authority and more vigor. So this is upsetting the colonists big time. In 1763, the British Prime Minister, George Grenville, set out to stop the smuggling. Parliament passed a law to have the accused smugglers tried by royally appointed judges rather than local juries. Grenville knew that American juries often found smugglers innocent. Parliament also empowered customs officers to obtain writs of assistance. These documents allowed the officers to search almost anywhere, shops, warehouses, and even private homes, for smuggled goods. and you see my political cartoon there. Hey, I thought a man's home was his castle. And you see an official with a writ of assistance that he can enter the home. Okay, what I know. Trial by a jury of one's peers and property rights were protected under the Magna Carta. These laws violate these protected rights under the Magna Carta, that those protected under the Magna Carta. In other words, the Magna Carta protects your home. It protects your home for searches and seizures, unless a jury finds that you may have committed a crime. You have to have something against you to prove that you committed some kind of crime in order for them to search. The writs of assistance violates that completely. It says we can enter your home whenever we want and take whatever we want just because we feel like it. So you can only imagine how that can be abused. Also, trial by jury was a guaranteed right. A local jury tried you. And now the British are saying, oh, no, it's got to be our royally appointed judges, not local juries. Because here's the trick. A lot of people were letting the smugglers go. They were letting them go because they bought goods from them. So they were finding them innocent because they didn't believe in the laws. How about that, huh? So the British government established these new laws and policies in an attempt to stop smuggling. They're trying to stop smuggling by violating the Magna Carta. Can anyone see where the problem is here? I mean, I can. It's pretty clear. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Let's move on to the Sugar Act, page 113. After 1764, Parliament passed a Sugar Act, which lowered a tax on the molasses the colonists imported. Grenville hoped this change would convince the colonists to pay the tax instead of smuggling. The act also allowed officers to seize goods from accused smugglers without going to court. I can see a problem there. The Sugar Act angered many colonists. They believed this and other new laws violated their rights. As British citizens, colonists argued they had a right to trial by jury and to be viewed as innocent until proven guilty, as stated in British law. Colonists also believed they had a right to be secure in their homes, without the threat of officers barging in to search for smuggled goods. Sound familiar, right? We talked about this. The British taxes also alarmed colonists. James Otis, a lawyer in Boston, argued, no part of England's colonies can be taxed without their consent. Every part has a right to be represented. This is from the Rights of British Colonies. So I'm seeing a picture here, something starting to form. First of all, to violate is to disregard or go against. That's to violate rights. And basically what these two paragraphs say here is what we've been saying, that they're violating the rights of the colonists consider themselves British citizens and subject to British law, which protected their individual freedoms. And those are being violated here. Should point out, too, that 10,000 troops, there is a stipulation in the Magna Carta that, and in the English Bill of Rights, that troops cannot be maintained in a time of peace. Well, if you have 10,000 troops in the country and there's no war going on, doesn't that violate the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights? Certainly does. So there's other things going on here that I'm not even mentioning, right? So what I know, once again, trial by jury appears innocent until proven guilty, and rights to property and right to representation before taxation are all protected under the Magna Carta. Even the Magna Carta has a line in it that says no taxation without the consent of the governed. And certainly the colonists don't have any representation in England. There are no representatives that sit in the House of Commons in Parliament that represent the colonists at all. So keep that in mind. Personal observation, hence the term no taxation without representation. And again, that naturally came to my mind as I was reading. Once again, the British tried to lower the tax on sugar to reduce the need to smuggle. But there's a problem here. There's an attitude problem. The colonists don't even like British laws regarding taxation. So they continue to smuggle. They're still angry. They're still resentful and hostile to these British laws. So they continue to smuggle. It still goes on. And note this thing that officers can seize goods from accused smugglers without going to court. Accused smugglers means they could take their goods without even going to a trial. So that was a great violation, a major violation of both the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. On page 114, I do want to point this out because it's a rather interesting thing, and I did a little bit of math on this. There is a caption called a growing debt. Interesting, if you did a math based upon this chart, people living in Britain were paying far more of the debt than the colonists. Colonists paid 18 shillings. Subjects in Britain were paying 17 pounds. Well, 17 pounds equals 340 shillings. So British subjects in England were actually being heavily taxed, much more than the colonists. So you have to wonder, what are the colonists complaining about? The people in Britain were paying nearly 19 times as much taxes as the colonists. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, so why are the colonists even complaining? And really, the complaint comes down to no taxation without representation. It comes down to the fact that, well, first of all, their rights are being violated all over the place under the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. They're totally being violated, number one. And number two, they have no say in these taxes at all. None. And that becomes a problem. That becomes a major problem for the colonists. So there are two sides to this coin, no pun intended. The British citizen in Britain is actually paying more, a heck of a lot more. So it's something to keep in mind. Okay, so hey, let's do a quick recall and wrap this one up. Dealing with Great Britain became difficult after the French and Indian War because British imposed new rules in the colonies, such as the Proclamation of 1763, which prohibited settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. The strict enforcement of trade rules to limit smuggling, laws and policies that violated the Magna Carta, such as the Writs of Assistance and the Sugar Act, which established taxes without representation. So that's what's covered here. That's what's covered here in this section. Respond. The British government established many of these new policies to limit conflict with Native Americans in the West and to protect the fur trade, to maintain control of colonists along the North American coast, and to raise more revenue by ending the smuggling trade and raising taxes, should be taxes, to increase revenue and pay for the French and Indian War. So there's my response. That's why all this is being done. And finally, it is interesting that the colonists were complaining about taxation and paying for the French and Indian War when, in reality, the people who lived in Great Britain were paying nearly 19 times more taxes to pay the same debts. Doesn't seem fair that the colonists were complaining. Okay, so I'm flipping the coin. I'm looking at this from the English perspective or the British perspective. They were certainly paying more in taxes. That's absolutely true. But the English and the British were not having their rights violated. And maybe that's the difference here. So there are two sides to this coin when we look at this position or this issue. So, hey, that wraps up. Here's our source information. Discovering Our Past, A History of the United States. Again, this read-along is created for educational use only as a supplemental tool for class. It should not be sold or purchased in any manner. It's simply here to make you a better student. And I will see you in the next part on new taxes on the colonies, which is extremely short. Okay, so have a good day.